One of the biggest decisions that you have to make when you're looking at buying a gravel bike is, do you go a 2x drivetrain or a 1x drivetrain? In today's video, we're going to hopefully help you make that decision. So let me give you a very quick overview here. What's the difference between a 1x and a 2x? Well, when I say 1 and 2, I'm talking about numbers, 1 and 2. So we've got a 1x, which is a one that will have a single chainring on the front, just the one chainring on the front. Or we can look at a 2x, like this one here is what we see on that bike, which has 2 chainrings on the front. That means that however many cogs we have at the back is multiplied by 2. Pros and cons both ways. I'm not going to say one's better than the other, but there are a couple of things that you should know before you go and buy your new bike. So along with having a single chainring on the front, it also means that we don't have a front derailleur. As a sort of domino effect on from that, not having a front derailleur means that we don't need to have a left-hand shifter as well. We can have just a brake lever. So there's less going on these 1x drivetrains. They're a little bit simpler, but they might not necessarily be the perfect thing for you. A common thing that we see through history of the bike industry is a lot of these brands tend to jump on trends, whether it's jumping onto disc brakes and then suddenly everybody goes disc brake, or whether it's jumping to the integrated cockpit with hidden cables and then suddenly every brand's doing it. Same with these drivetrains. However, what I've noticed with the drivetrain is that not every brand thinks that one is the best option. There's a real mix of it between different brands. And as well as that, a lot of brands come with a single chainring or a double chainring option, or at least they give you mounting points so you could go one way or the other. So what I'm loosely saying here is one is not better than the other. They both have a place for different cyclists. So what I'm really trying to say here is the industry hasn't decided which one is better because they still make both of them. So that's why we're making today's video, so that you can make an educated decision for yourself. So let's start by talking about the pros and cons each way. I'm going to start with the 1x drivetrain first. The pros are, since you only have one chainring rather than 2, there's less weight because there's literally less products, there's less components there. So you save a bit of weight there on the chainrings. You also save weight by the fact that there is now no front derailleur. So having no front derailleur, again, there's less there to weigh anything. There's also no cable that goes to the front derailleur because there is no front derailleur. So there's just a little bit less there. So it means that the whole thing's a little bit more lightweight. Since there's no front derailleur cable, it means that there is no front derailleur cable. So there's less cables on the front end. It's a bit less of like a bird's nest sort of thing up the front. So I would say it looks cleaner. It looks a little bit nicer. And the third thing that I think is an absolute pro with these 1x drivetrains is, since there's no front derailleur and there's no need to adjust anything in the front end, there's less that can go wrong. There's less chance of a mechanical failure. The mechanical failures on a front derailleur aren't uncommon, as in they do sometimes happen. Maybe the cable's stretched out of place, maybe a stick got caught in there and it's bent the derailleur or it's twisted it, or maybe you bumped it with your foot or something like that. There is one more thing that you can break there. So if you remove the front derailleur, there's one less thing to break. There's less chance of a mechanical issue on the bike. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to quickly mention that YouTube sent us a message recently saying that 94% of people watching these videos haven't subscribed yet. So I just wanted to quickly say that we have tens of thousands of dollars worth of value in these videos, and we're giving it all to you for free. So if it is something that you appreciate and you want to help our small business succeed, I'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button down below. Anyway, let's get back to the video. And sort of linked to that, but I'm going to give it its own point, is that now that you don't have to change between chainrings on the front, you can't really drop the chain. I mean, you can, but your chance of dropping the chain is drastically reduced because you don't have to derail the chain with the derailleur to jump between the different cogs. So there's less that can go wrong. Also, when we look at these 1x drivetrains, a lot of the time the chainring will be a narrow, wide chainring. I'll talk more about that a little bit later, but a narrow wide chainring is a really good upgrade that I've seen on these 1xs. If I was to jump across to some of the cons that we'd see with a 1x drivetrain, the first thing is that you have less gears. If you've got 1 at the front and 11 at the back, you have 11 gears to select from throughout the bike ride. So your gear range, your gear ratio might be reduced in comparison to these 2x drivetrains. And given the fact that your range is limited, you kind of have to pick by the size of the chainring whether you want to have that really good top end speed going down the hill really fast on the bitumen, or if you want to have really good low end speed when you're going up the hill. I would consider this a con because you have to choose between top speed or low end speed, and sometimes you want both. Now let's move across to the 2x. This bike here has 2 chainrings on the front. That means that if we've got 2 on the front and 11 on the back, instead of having 11 gears like we'd have on this 1x drivetrain, we have 22 gears because we've got the amount at the back multiplied by the amount at the front. We also have quite a large chainring, which is probably bigger than anything you'd see on a 1x, but we also have a small chainring, which is probably smaller than anything you'd see on a 1x. So we've got the best of both worlds. So this means that you don't have to sacrifice top end speed or bottom end speed because you're able to have both, because you've got the 2 different chainrings that can be towards either the top or the bottom end speed. And a flow on from that is that the 2x drivetrain is able to go on all different types of terrain because you don't have to be biased towards the fast or the slow speed sections. But the cons that I see with the 2x drivetrains is they are a little bit more complex. There's kind of more that can go wrong and more that needs to be set up. With that front derailleur, we have to make sure that when you click the shifter, it jumps across exactly the right amount each time. Not a millimeter further, not a millimeter shorter. It has to be perfect each time. Also, there's a little bit more maintenance involved with these 2x's because we have to think about the left-hand shifter, or front shifter, and we also have to think about the cable that's connecting it to the derailleur as well. As I mentioned just before, we have a slightly higher chance of the chain falling off at the front because when we press the shifter, we have to derail the chain so that it can jump across to the other cog. So there is a slightly higher chance of it falling off. Also, now that we have the 2x drivetrain, the derailleur at the back is a little bit softer, a little bit slacker, a little bit more malleable so that it can allow the chain to move up and down between the big chainring and the small chainring. That means that the tension on the chain is slightly lower because it has to allow for it to flex, which means that as you're riding along a bumpy section of terrain, it can shake a little bit more than what it would on the 1x drivetrain. So which one is better for what terrain? Well, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to describe gravel bike riding as a bit of a spectrum. I don't think there's any specific points that it can be. It's kind of anywhere along this sort of sphere here. On one side, we've got cyclocross racing, we've got lightweight, we've got carbon fiber, wearing your lycra, sprinting into the finish line, chucking the bike over your shoulder, jumping back on, all this gnarly stuff. And then on the complete other end of the spectrum, we've got what I would call bike packing. That's where you've got your tent strapped to the bike, you've got everything except the kitchen sink, all strapped to the bike, water, all the things that you're gonna need because you might be camping on the side of the road for many days at a time. So there's sort of 2 complete ends of the spectrum here. I think that the drivetrain that you need is pretty dependent on how far you want to lean on one way of the spectrum. By that I mean, if we look at these cyclocross race bikes, these people that are chucking the bike over their shoulder, running up some stairs and then jumping back on it, I think they might always have a 1x drivetrain on their bike because they don't want anything to go wrong mechanically because they're not pulling over midway through a bike race to repair it. Whereas if we were looking at these 2x drivetrains, I see them a lot of the time on these bike packing bikes because if you're trying to ride across the countryside, maybe you're trying to ride through Europe or something like that, where there's some real hills that you've got to get up over, you need that easy gear to get all the way up while you're carrying 20 kilos of extra food and water and tents and bivvies and whatever else you've got chucked on there. You need to be able to lug all of that up the hill. So you want the easiest gear you can. But then there might be some sections between towns where you're riding on a bitumen road that's perfectly flat, so you need that top end speed. So you want that as well. So again, depending on whereabouts in the spectrum you are, I think we've got the 1x drivetrain over this end, and then we can come across to the 2x drivetrain over this end. And then just to throw a little curveball into here, some people consider themselves mountain bikers, and now they've bought themselves a gravel bike. If you're coming from a mountain bike background, you're already out here chucking wheelies and doing skids and jumping berms and whatever else you're doing, then you might already want to go the 1x drivetrain because you might not be very mechanically sympathetic to your bike. You might just kind of jump off curves, run through potholes, ride through rocks and stuff because that's what you do on a mountain bike. So you might appreciate the single chainring on the front rather than the double because you're less likely to break it. You also probably don't think it's very cool to have a 2x drivetrain because you already wear your hat backwards on your mountain bike. The next thing that I want to talk about is maintenance and reliability. When we're looking at these 2x drivetrains, now that you have an extra derailleur at the front, there's one more thing that you have to think about when you're servicing and cleaning the bike. So they're sort of a little bit more involved in that sense. Whereas on these 1x drivetrains, there's fewer moving parts, so there's less that can go wrong. Also, now that we don't have a front derailleur or 2 chainrings on the front, if there's a little bit of mud on the frame, you've got a little bit more clearance, so it's less likely to get all stuck. Also, they're a little bit easier to clean and stay on top of maintenance-wise. Even though throughout this video, I've made it sound like the 2x drivetrains are fragile and made of glass, they're actually incredibly strong these days. So I'm not saying that they're bad, I'm just saying that there is one more thing that can break. Let's talk quickly about cost here, because that is something that you're probably thinking about as well. Both of these bikes have a chain, which is a consumable part, so it is supposed to wear out over time. I don't think one necessarily wears out much faster than the other. Maybe the 2x a tiny bit more because it has to jump between the different chain rings at the front, but I really don't think it's much of a big deal. The cassette, I would argue that the cassette is going to wear out similar amount to what it typically would on the 1x or the 2x, because it's still, the chain is always going to be touching the cogs at the back. And then the chain rings at the front, these 1x drivetrains are sometimes made of a stronger material than what these 2x drivetrains are. So even though we have 2 chain rings on the front, what the time it takes to wear through 2 chain rings might be similar to the time it takes to wear through 1 chain ring at the front. However, they might be a little bit more expensive on the 1x drivetrain. So if we're talking money-wise, it probably works out about even. Now I want to quickly talk about compatibility issues. On the 2x drivetrains, there tends to be a marriage of 2 chain rings that we can go for, whether it's a 50 and a 34, or a 52 and a 36, or a 53 and a 39, but you couldn't really do like a 53 and a 34 because the jump is too big for what the derailleur can do. So there's a couple of, like, I call them marriages that you kind of have to stick with, a couple of ratios that you have to stick with a lot of the time. You might be able to go a couple of teeth different here or there, but best to just follow the recommendations there, I think. Whereas on these single chain rings, you can pretty much go to any different size that you want because you don't have any issue of it rubbing on a derailleur up at the top or down at the bottom. So you should be pretty good to do whatever you want on there. On the same topic, I want to mention that the shifter on the 2x drivetrains, the shifter is the left-hand lever which will do the front derailleur, has a shift lever. It has a button that you can click to change the front derailleur. Whereas on the single chain rings, they don't actually have a lever. If they do have a lever, it's either not being used or the cable is set up to a drop a seat post on the seat post instead. So it's not really doing anything to do with a front derailleur because it's not there. Also, if you do find yourself needing to replace that left-hand brake lever, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to find a brake lever rather than a shift brake lever. So you might have a bit of an issue there. Let's talk about future-proofing for a second. By this, I mean, will you still be able to buy these parts in 5 or 10 years' time? On both of these options, yes. If you've got a much older gravel bike that maybe has a 10-speed drivetrain, for example, or maybe even a 9-speed, you might struggle to find the correct chain rings that you'll need to suit the crankset that you've got. So that might be something that you just need to sort of take into account when you're buying it. If you're looking at a 1x and it does have a lever on the left hand, but you don't have a front derailleur for it, future you could perhaps upgrade to a dropper seat post, which means that by pressing that lever, the saddle height could drop, or you can press it again and it can come back up. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but it's a really common thing in the mountain bike world because you can put the seat post out of the way so that if you're doing jumps and skids and that kind of thing, you're not going to accidentally bump yourself with the saddle. That dropper seat post could also be pressed to go down so it's easier to reach the floor at traffic lights too. So which one should you actually go for? Well, if you consider yourself a mountain biker and you're buying your first gravel bike and you're probably going to treat it not very well, you might need to go the 1x drivetrain so it can handle the abuse that you're going to give it. But if you're thinking of going bike packing and maybe you want to go camping with some friends and you want to ride all the way down to maybe Deep Creek we've got down here, you might appreciate going the 2x drivetrain because it means that when you go down to Blowhole Beach, you'll be able to ride back up the hill on the way back out as well. So that would be better suited to the 2x drivetrain. But if you're the sort of person that's looking for the simplest option that's going to take the least amount of maintenance, you sound like a 1x drivetrain sort of person. So what I'm saying here is have a bit of a think as to where you're riding at the moment and where you think you might be riding in the future. If you're going to be riding in flat areas that are quite bumpy, you might appreciate the 1x drivetrain. But if you're going to be spending lots of time up in the steep hills, both uphill and downhill, you might appreciate the 2x drivetrain a little bit more. But I also want to say you'll be absolutely stoked either way. If you get the single chainring or the double chainring, gravel bikes are becoming one of the coolest things out there and everybody seems to have a gravel bike at the moment. I don't know what the split is, but it probably is about 50-50. So you won't be disappointed either way. So just go out and buy whatever that gravel bike is that you're already looking at. If you've been watching this video and you want to check out either of these 2 gravel bikes, they're both on our website, Recycle Bicycle Sales. We're here in Adelaide, South Australia. This one here is a Trek Domani SLR7. And this one here is a Specialized Crux. They're both carbon fiber. They're both listed on our website. That's a 56 centimeter, that's a 58 centimeter. if it sounds like it's something you're interested in, you can have a look on our website. I'll put the link down below as well. And if you already have a racing road bike at home and you're thinking that you want to turn it into a makeshift gravel bike, we've also got a video back on our YouTube channel about how to do that. So you might want to check that one out before you go and splash some cash. I hope this video helped you understand which drivetrain is better suited to the riding that you're going to be doing. If you reckon there's anything that we should have said that we haven't said just yet, let us know in the comment section down below. I know that everybody that watches these videos often goes and checks out the comment section down there. So if we can give away as much value as we can, you and me, then we can help out someone down in the comment section below. Otherwise, I'm going to say thanks for watching and we'll see you later. Bye.